A snowstorm, a broken-down car, a woman with no ID, no phone, and nowhere to go. When widowed single dad Ben Carter opens his modest cabin to a mysterious stranger, he sees only a lost soul in need of help, someone his late wife would have insisted he protect. What he doesn't know is that the woman sleeping on his couch is Lily Lancaster, heiress to the Lancaster estate, the reclusive owner of the mansion that overlooks the very town Ben struggles to survive in. As days turn into weeks and warmth grows between them, secrets begin to unravel. And when the truth comes out, Ben must choose between pride and forgiveness, while Lily must confront the life she ran away from and the love she never expected to find. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The wind howled like a wounded animal, clawing at the windshield of Ben Carter's rusted pickup as it crawled along the icy back road. Snow flurries whipped through the fading light, blurring the lines between road and ditch until everything looked like a snow globe shaken too hard. The old heater groaned, doing its best to fight off the creeping cold that seeped through every crack in the cab. Ben gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles white, jaw clenched. He should have left earlier, he knew that. But the truck wouldn't start again this morning, not until he'd coaxed it back to life with jumper cables and a silent prayer. And now he was late. Hope had been waiting at the elementary school for 30 minutes already, maybe more. Guilt gnawed at him as he pressed the gas a little harder, tires slipping slightly on the sheen of ice. The gaslight blinked back at him, angry, insistent. "Not now," he muttered, more to himself than to the truck. "Come on, just a few more miles." He was running on fumes again. Outside the snow thickened, turning from flurries into sheets. Visibility dropped with every breath. A pair of headlights blinked past in the opposite lane, gone in a flash. No one else was dumb enough to be on the road right now. No one but a desperate dad in a failing truck, trying to make sure his daughter wasn't the last kid left standing alone in the snow. The radio crackled, then died altogether, static. Perfect. Ben wiped the fog from the inside of the windshield with his sleeve and squinted ahead. The school was still another 10 minutes out, maybe more at this speed. His phone buzzed on the passenger seat. He snatched it up with one hand. Hope. 3 missed calls. His chest tightened. The cold wasn't just in the air anymore. It was inside him, in his gut, in his heart, in the panic that slowly spread under his ribs like frostbite. "I'm coming, sweetheart," he whispered, though she couldn't hear him. He just hoped he got us out of there before the storm got worse, before the tank hit empty, before he failed her again. The headlights cut through the white haze just enough for Ben to make out the shape. Twisted metal crumpled against the trees about 30 feet off the road. A car. Silver, maybe. Hard to tell under all the snow. The hood was popped, steam hissing up in the freezing air like an angry ghost. He slowed instinctively, tires crunching on packed snow, the truck fishtailing slightly before he eased it back under control. For a second, he thought maybe the car was abandoned, but then movement. Someone, no, a woman, stumbled out from the trees. She clutched her coat tight, arms crossed over her chest as she staggered toward the road, shoes sinking into the snow with every step. She looked disoriented, like she'd been walking in circles or running from something. Her hair, dark and windswept, was half frozen against her cheeks, and her legs shook with every step like she was running on instinct alone. Ben's gut clenched. He threw the truck into park, yanked the door open, and jumped down into the snow. "Hey, hey, are you okay?" he called out, voice sharp over the wind. The woman blinked through the storm, eyes wide and unfocused. She didn't answer, just kept moving, like she hadn't registered the voice at all. Ben ran toward her, boots crunching, one hand outstretched. She was pale, too pale, and her lips were the wrong kind of blue. "You're freezing," he said, catching her by the shoulders just as she stumbled forward again. "You hurt? Were you in the car?" She nodded faintly, but her knees buckled. Ben caught her before she could hit the snow. "All right, Okay, let's get you out of this cold. He hoisted her carefully, guiding her back toward the truck. She didn't fight him. That scared him more than if she had. By the time he got her into the passenger seat and cranked the heat, her eyes had fluttered halfway shut. No ID, no phone, he muttered, scanning the seat for anything that might help. The only thing in her coat pocket was a crumpled gum wrapper and a hotel key card. No name, no wallet. He glanced at her again. "Who the hell are you?" he whispered. But the only answer was her shallow breath against the cold glass. The cabin creaked with the weight of the storm outside. Wind slammed against the windows in bursts, rattling the glass like a warning. Inside, the heat from the fireplace fought back the cold, casting flickering shadows over the worn couch where the woman lay, swaddled in one of Ben's old blankets. Her clothes were still damp, her skin pale as the snow she'd stumbled out of. Hope sat cross-legged on the floor, clutching a mug of hot cocoa, her eyes wide as she stole glances at the stranger. Ben crouched beside the couch, a steaming mug in his hands, not offering it yet, just waiting. The woman stirred, blinking against the light. Her lips parted, dry and cracked, her voice barely a whisper. "Water?" Ben moved fast, grabbing the glass from the table and holding it steady while she sipped. Her hands trembled. "What's your name?" he asked gently, keeping his voice low, careful. "Do you remember anything?" She blinked slowly, eyes moving around the room like she was still trying to place where she was, or who she was. I think it's Lily." "Okay," Ben nodded. "Lily. That's something. Can you tell me what happened? Your car, it was off the road. You were alone." Her brow furrowed. I don't know. I don't remember driving. I remember cold, the trees, and before that, nothing." She looked down at her hands, like maybe they could remind her of something, but her expression only tightened with confusion. "No phone on you, no ID, no purse, just a hotel key card in your coat." Ben watched her carefully. "Does that ring any bells?" She shook her head slowly, panic creeping into her voice. "I don't know. I don't know why I was out there. I don't know how I got here." Hope leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is she sick, Daddy?" Ben glanced at his daughter, then back at Lily. "I think maybe she's just been through something real rough." He stood, heart heavy. He'd seen this kind of thing before. Trauma didn't always bleed where you could see it. She wasn't lying. He could see it in her eyes. Whatever she'd lost, it wasn't just memory. It was something deeper. And whatever it was still chasing her. Ben wasn't used to bringing strangers home, not since Megan passed. The cabin had become sacred ground, just him and Hope. A fragile rhythm of early morning, school lunches, and whispered bedtime stories. But tonight, everything felt off-kilter. The woman, Lily, shivered quietly in the passenger seat, her eyes vacant, body tense, as if she were waiting to wake up from some long, terrible dream. The heater wheezed as it pushed warm air toward her, but it barely made a dent. She didn't complain. She hadn't said much since she'd whispered her name. Hope met them at the front door, her pink slippers poking out from beneath pajama pants covered in cartoon bunnies. Her eyes widened the moment she saw Lily, tucked under Ben's coat, like some half-broken bird. "Who's that?" she asked, blinking up at her father. Ben gave her a look, quiet but firm. "Someone who needs a little help?" Hope stepped aside, still watching. Always curious, always observant, just like her mother used to be. Lily stumbled once inside, the warmth hitting her like a wave. Ben guided her to the couch, careful, like she might splinter apart. He pulled an old quilt from the basket beside the hearth, Megan's favorite, faded but still soft, and wrapped it gently around her shoulders. She clutched it like a lifeline. "Bathroom's down the hall if you need it. I'll get you something warm to drink," he said. She nodded once, her lips pressed tight. Hope hovered near the doorway, biting her lip. "Is she going to stay?" "Just for the night," Ben said, heading toward the kitchen. "She looks like she came from a fairy tale," Hope whispered, more to herself than anyone else. In the kitchen, Ben poured hot water into the mug, stirring cocoa slowly. His hands were steady, but his mind raced. He didn't know who she was, didn't know what trouble might come knocking after her, but he'd seen enough people fall apart to recognize the look in her eyes. Haunted. Hollow. She was running from something, and whether she remembered it or not, it was still with her. He just hoped he hadn't invited it into his home. The smell of frying butter drifted through the cabin, mingling with the crisp scent of pine from the log Ben had thrown on the fire an hour ago. Snow still blanketed the world outside, trapping them in a hushed stillness, but inside, the morning was beginning to stir. Ben stood at the stove, flipping pancakes with the practiced ease of a man who'd learned to cook because there was no one else to do it. Hope sat at the kitchen table in her oversized hoodie, feet swinging above the floor, humming softly as she colored. It was routine, comforting, predictable. Until Lily stepped into the kitchen, barefoot, wrapped in one of Hope's extra blankets. Her hair was tied back in a loose braid, still damp from the shower, and for the first time her cheeks carried a hint of color. She looked less like a ghost, more like someone trying to remember how to be human. "Morning," she said softly. Ben glanced over his shoulder. "Hey, you slept okay?" She nodded. "I think so. Your daughter. She left me a glass of water and a stuffed bunny." Ben smirked. "That sounds like Hope." Lily moved toward the counter, hesitating. "Can I help? With breakfast?" He shrugged. "Sure, if you're up for it." She stepped in beside him, grabbing a spatula. Her first pancake landed half on the griddle, half on the stove. She winced. "I'm better with coffee," she murmured. Ben chuckled. "You're doing fine." Hope peeked up from her drawing. "Are you staying for breakfast?" Lily looked startled, then glanced at Ben. "For breakfast, yeah," he answered before Lily could speak. Lily smiled at Hope, genuine, if a little uncertain. "Thank you for the bunny." "She's for people who look sad," Hope said simply, turning back to her crayons. Something flickered across Lily's face, an ache she tried to hide but couldn't. Her hands trembled slightly as she flipped her next pancake. Ben watched her from the corner of his eye. She was clearly someone who wasn't used to kitchens or kids, but she was trying. Clumsy, yeah, but kind. And somehow that made the silence in the room feel warmer than the fire ever could. The afternoon sun filtered through the frosted windows, casting pale golden light across the living room floor. Outside, the snow had finally stopped, leaving a world of quiet white stillness behind. Inside, the crackle of the fire was the only sound, filling the silence between them with something that almost felt like peace. Lily sat curled in the corner of the couch, a mug of tea cradled in her hands, steam rising to warm her face. Ben was across from her, hunched over a pile of receipts at the kitchen table. A pen clutched between calloused fingers, jaw tight with focus. The weight in his shoulders hadn't left since she'd met him. If anything, it seemed heavier now that the immediate crisis, her frozen limbs, the storm, had passed. Hope was in the other room, singing to her stuffed animals like it was the most natural thing in the world. Lily cleared her throat softly. "You're really good with her." Ben looked up, surprised, as if he'd forgotten she was still there. He offered a tired smile. "Hope? Yeah. She's the only thing I'm actually proud of. She's sweet, strong, too. She had to be." He leaned back in the chair, eyes distant now. Her mom, Megan, passed 3 years ago, hit and run. One minute she was driving home from the grocery store, the next... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Lily's hands tightened around her mug. "I'm so sorry." Ben nodded once, swallowing the emotion like it was something he'd gotten used to choking down. After that, it was just me and Hope. This cabin was Megan's grandparents'. Been in the family since before the war. Not much, but it's home. She looked around, the patched floorboards, the mismatched furniture, the framed photo of a young couple on the mantel, smiling like the world had never hurt them. "And the garage," she asked softly. "Fixes cars during the day, fixes this place at night, keeps us afloat." Barely. Lily didn't know what to say. The warmth in the cabin had a cost, sacrifice written into every beam and floorboard. "You do all this alone?" Ben looked at her, something tired and real in his eyes. There wasn't a choice. And somehow that simple answer told her everything. Lily sat by the window as the early evening crept in, the sky outside fading from silver to slate. The storm had passed, but the cold had settled in, thick and stubborn, seeping through the cracks in the cabin's walls. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, trying to ignore the rattling of the old heater in the corner as it groaned under the weight of another long winter night. Ben was outside, shoveling the walkway again. He moved with the kind of tired precision that came from doing something not because you wanted to, but because you had to. Every motion calculated, controlled, necessary. She watched him from behind the glass. His coat was worn, sleeves frayed at the cuffs, one elbow patched with a square of mismatched denim. His gloves didn't match either. One had a tear in the palm. Still, he worked like none of that mattered. Inside, the warmth flickered uncertainly. She had seen it earlier that morning, how he banged the side of the heater with the heel of his hand to get it running. She'd noticed the duct-taped window pane near the back door, the way the faucet in the kitchen let out a tired squeal before sputtering water. Little things. Things you didn't usually notice in places like this, because usually places like this didn't touch her life at all. Lily stood and walked toward the fireplace, kneeling to place another log on the embers. The crackle grew louder, brighter. She stared into it like it might offer answers, but it didn't. Just warmth. Temporary and fleeting. She didn't belong here. That thought hit her like a punch to the ribs, not because the place was lacking, but because it was real. And that scared her. She wasn't used to chipped mugs or kids who offered their stuffed animals as peace offerings. She wasn't used to men like Ben, who didn't flinch at hard work or hesitate to give warmth to a stranger with no past. And the worst part, the part that left her throat tight, was that some part of her wanted to belong here. But she couldn't, not really. Because if he knew who she was, what she'd left behind, none of this would be happening, and it would all be gone. The bell over the diner door jingled as Ben stepped inside, shaking off the cold. The warmth of the place hit him instantly. Coffee, fried bacon, and too many eyes watching him at once. He gave a nod to the waitress behind the counter, tried to ignore the way conversation softened when he walked past. It wasn't paranoia. He'd lived in this town long enough to know what silence meant, especially when it followed you. He slid into a booth near the back, unzipped his coat halfway, and reached for the coffee pot on the table. Donna, the owner, usually came right over with a smile and a refill, but this morning she lingered at the counter, whispering to Marla from the library. Their eyes flicked toward him, then back again fast, like they didn't want to get caught. Ben sighed and stared out the window. Snow still blanketed the sidewalks, turning the town into a postcard version of itself. Peaceful, if you didn't know what hid behind small-town pleasantries. "Morning," came a familiar voice. He turned to see Tom Jacobs sliding into the booth across from him without asking. Former classmate, former football star, current part-time mechanic, and full-time gossip. "You hear the news?" Tom asked, his grin just wide enough to be irritating. Ben didn't look up. "What news?" "Word is you've got company out at the cabin, stranger woman. Some folks saw you picking up supplies at Wilkins' store. 2 toothbrushes, fancy shampoo." Tom leaned in, dropping his voice. "Kinda odd for a guy who usually buys off-brand everything." Ben's jaw tightened. "She got a name?" Tom pressed. "Does it matter?" Tom chuckled. But there was something mean behind it. "Just saying, Ben, you know how people get. New face in town, especially staying with someone like you. Folks start wondering. You don't want hope mixed up in something strange." Ben stood, grabbing his coat. "Thanks for the concern." "Hey," Tom said, holding up his hands, "just looking out." Ben didn't answer. He pushed out of the booth and left cash on the table. As he stepped back into the cold, he felt the weight of it settle on his shoulders. They were already talking. And once this town started talking, it didn't stop. The dream came in fragments like broken glass catching light, distorted, sharp, and impossible to hold on to. Lily ran down a long corridor, walls gleaming white and cold. Her bare feet slapped against marble. Her breath echoed, shallow and panicked. Voices followed her, rising behind closed doors, urgent and angry. "Lily, get back here! You don't get to disappear!" She turned corner after corner, the hallway never ending. She knew this place. She knew those voices, but no matter how fast she ran, no matter how tightly she clutched the silver necklace around her neck, she couldn't wake up. And then, suddenly, silence. The kind that presses down on you like weight. She stood in front of a grand wooden door, hand trembling as she reached for the handle. Before her fingers could close around it, she jolted upright, breath ragged, heart slamming against her ribs. The room was dark except for the glow of the fire dying in the hearth. The cabin. Ben's couch. Reality caught up with her all at once, her body aching, throat dry, eyes already wet with tears. She didn't remember crying. She pressed the blanket tighter around her shoulders, trying to steady herself. The voices still echoed faintly in her ears, like ghosts refusing to leave. The door creaked open, and a soft beam of light spilled in from the hallway. Hope stood there, clutching her stuffed bunny, hair messy with sleep. "I heard you," she whispered. "Were you scared?" Lily wiped her face quickly, trying to smile. "A little. Just a dream." Hope stepped closer, silent in her socks, and climbed onto the couch without asking. She sat beside Lily and leaned into her side, small and warm and real. "My mom used to have bad dreams too," she said, her voice muffled. "Dad says dreams can't hurt you, even if they feel real." Lily swallowed hard, fighting the lump in her throat. He's right. But even as she said it, she knew some dreams weren't just dreams. Some were memories trying to crawl their way back, and she wasn't sure she was ready for what they wanted to show her. Snowflakes drifted lazily in the morning light, the storm's earlier fury replaced by a quiet calm. The air was bitterly cold, but the kind that felt almost clean as it filled your lungs. Ben set down the heavy maul and wiped his brow with the back of his glove, his breath puffing out in white clouds. Behind him, the cabin door creaked open. He turned to see Lily standing there, bundled in one of Hope's scarves, her borrowed coat hanging awkwardly on her frame. She hesitated for a moment, then stepped out into the snow, crunching toward him. "You don't have to stay out here," he said, nodding at the pile of logs. "It's not exactly the fun part of cabin life." She stuffed her hands into the coat pockets, her shoulders hunching against the cold. "I can't just sit inside all day. I need to, I don't know, do something. Help!" He raised an eyebrow. "You ever split wood before?" She shook her head. "No, but you can show me." He considered her for a long moment, then handed her the maul. "All right, just watch your feet." It was obvious from the start she'd never held anything heavier than a purse. She gripped the maul awkwardly, her gloves too thin for the task, her arms trembling as she lifted it over her shoulder. Ben tried not to laugh. "It's not a sword," he said. "Relax your grip. Let the weight do the work." She gritted her teeth, adjusted her stance, and swung again. The maul connected with the log at an odd angle, sending a chunk of wood skidding across the snow. She let out a surprised yelp and stumbled back, but when she looked up, she was smiling. "I almost got it." "Almost," Ben said, his voice carrying the faintest hint of a chuckle. "Try again." This time she planted her feet more firmly, raising the maul high and bringing it down with a controlled thud. The log split cleanly, halves falling neatly to the ground. She stared at the result, blinking in surprise, before laughing, a light, unguarded laugh that caught Ben off guard. It was the first time he'd seen her smile without hesitation, without that weight hanging over her. "That felt amazing," she said, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. Ben smiled despite himself. "Now you're getting it." She swung again and again, her form still clumsy but improving with each strike. The air filled with the rhythmic sound of splitting wood, and for a moment the tension that had followed her like a shadow seemed to lift. The snow continued to fall softly around them, the cabin behind them steady and warm. For the first time, It felt less like an escape and more like something real. The sky above was a pale, frozen blue as Ben guided his truck along the winding road toward town. Hope sat in the passenger seat, bundled in her pink jacket and staring out the window with wide-eyed curiosity. Snow lined the shoulders of the road like walls, and the sunlight glinted off it so brightly it hurt to look at. As they rounded a bend, Hope pressed her face closer to the glass. "Daddy," she said, pointing a gloved hand, "look at that." Ben followed her gaze. Through the bare winter trees, a massive stone mansion loomed on a hill overlooking the town. Its gabled roof jutted against the horizon like jagged teeth, and its frost-covered windows reflected the light in a way that made it seem alive, watching. No matter how many times Ben drove this route, the sight always made him uneasy. "That's the Lancaster estate," he said after a moment. "It's been up there since before I was born." Hope's nose wrinkled. "It's creepy." "Maybe a little," he admitted. The place had always felt out of place here, as if someone had plucked it from another world and dropped it into the woods. It didn't belong, just like whoever lived there didn't seem to belong. "Miss Penny says that's where the rich lady lives," Hope said, matter-of-factly. Ben's hands tightened on the wheel. People say a lot of things. Hope frowned, studying the mansion as the truck passed. "Do you think she's nice?" Ben hesitated. He didn't know much about the owner, just the whispers that circulated through town like smoke. Reclusive, strange. He'd heard stories about old money and new scandals, about a woman who rarely showed her face but somehow knew everyone's business. None of it ever sat right with him. "Don't worry about her, Hope," he said finally. "She's got her own life up there. We've got ours down here." As the mansion disappeared behind another curve in the road, Ben's chest felt heavier than it should. There was something about that place, something that always made him wonder what it must be like to live on that hill, looking down on everyone else. And for a reason he couldn't quite place, the thought left him colder than the wind slicing through the truck's broken heater. Lily clutched the basket close to her side as she wandered the grocery aisles, scanning the shelves with a distracted gaze. The store was quiet, aside from the occasional scrape of a cartwheel and the faint hum of the overhead lights. She'd offered to pick up a few things on her own this time, insisting to Ben that she could manage it. It was a small errand, a simple gesture, but the act of moving through the aisles alone made her shoulders tighten with a tension she couldn't quite shake. At the checkout counter, the clerk glanced up and did a double take. He was young, maybe early 20s, with a shock of dark hair and a sharp, curious stare. His hand stilled on the conveyor belt, leaving the loaf of bread half scanned. Lily shifted uncomfortably, her grip tightening on the basket. "Is there something wrong?" "No," the clerk said quickly, but his gaze didn't waver. "It's just, you look really familiar." She forced a smile, her heart thudding in her chest. "I don't think we've met." The clerk tilted his head, studying her face more closely. "It's not that. I'm sure I've seen you before, like in a magazine or something." Her stomach twisted. "I think you've got the wrong person." He hesitated, then shook his head as if trying to piece it together. "No, I'm sure of it. A couple months ago, I saw this article. Some big society thing. You look just like her." "I'm not from around here," she said, her voice a little too sharp, a little too quick. "Just passing through." The clerk nodded slowly, but his eyes still lingered. "Sorry, didn't mean to bother you. It's just weird, you know? You really look like her." She tried to smile again, but it felt more like a grimace. "I'm not her." The clerk finally turned back to scanning the bread, muttering something under his breath. Lily focused on the counter, on her hands, on the faint tremor in her fingers as she paid. By the time she pushed out into the cold, the small plastic bag of groceries swinging in her hand, the anxiety had crept up her throat and settled in her chest. The words echoed in her mind. "You look just like her." No, she wasn't her. Not anymore. The phone rang, its shrill tone cutting through the quiet of the cabin. Ben paused with his hand on the coffee mug, his stomach tightening. He knew that number. It had been showing up on the caller ID more and more lately, but this time it felt heavier, like the ring carried the weight of all the calls he hadn't answered before. With a sigh, he set the mug down and picked up the phone. "Yeah?" "Mr. Carter, this is Mr. Duncan from First National. I'm calling regarding your past due mortgage payments." Ben leaned against the counter, his free hand running through his hair. He could feel the heat rising in his chest. I know I'm behind." "You're 3 months behind, sir," the man continued, his voice flat and matter-of-fact. "I understand times are tough, but we need to establish a payment plan before this escalates further." Ben's fingers curled into a fist at his side. "I'm working on it. I just need a little more time." "I'm sorry, Mr. Carter, but we've already extended your deadline twice. If you can't make a payment by next week, we'll have no choice but to—" "I said I'm working on it." Ben's voice cracked, harsher than he intended. There was a brief silence on the line, and he squeezed his eyes shut, trying to steady his breathing. "Next week," the man repeated calmly. "That's as far as we can extend it." The call ended before Ben could respond. He stared at the phone in his hand, the anger draining into something colder, something closer to fear. He placed the phone back on the counter, his movements careful, deliberate. Hope's laughter drifted in from the living room, where she played with her crayons and stuffed animals. The sound sent a sharp pang through him. He couldn't let her know. Not about the calls, not about the missed payments, not about how close they were to losing the only place they had left. Ben picked up his coffee again, taking a long sip even though it had gone cold. He leaned against the sink, staring out at the snow-covered trees. The silence pressed in on him, but he pushed the panic down, shoving it into the same corner where he kept everything else he didn't want her to see. Ben gritted his teeth as he tried to straighten up, the sharp biting pain shooting down his spine like a live wire. He let out a hiss through his teeth, hand gripping the edge of the counter for support. The coffee pot sat just out of reach, mocking him from the stovetop. "You okay?" Lily's voice came from behind him. He hadn't noticed her come in, still bundled in the oversized cardigan she'd borrowed. "Yeah, I'm fine," Ben grunted, waving her off, but when he shifted his weight, his knees buckled slightly and he had to catch himself against the counter. "Doesn't look fine," Lily said, stepping closer. Her eyes were sharp, focused, as she scanned his face, his hunched posture. "What happened?" "Back's just acting up," he admitted reluctantly. "Old injury. Flared up again this morning. Nothing I can't handle." She crossed her arms, one eyebrow raised. "You're sure about that?" Ben opened his mouth to argue, but a fresh stab of pain shut him up. He muttered something under his breath as he let himself slump into one of the kitchen chairs, his hand pressed against the small of his back. "Here, let me see if I can help," Lily said, grabbing the pill bottle off the shelf where she'd seen him put it before. She filled a glass of water, then placed both on the table in front of him. "Take these." He shot her a look. "You playing nurse now?" "Just take them," she said firmly, planting her hands on her hips. "You can't take care of Hope if you're doubled over in pain, right?" Ben hesitated, then sighed and reached for the pills. He washed them down with a long sip of water, grimacing at the taste. When he set the glass down, he glanced up at her, his expression softening slightly. "Thanks," he muttered. "Don't mention it," Lily said, turning toward the stove. "Now why don't you sit tight while I try my hand at making those pancakes?" Ben blinked. "You? Cook?" She shrugged. "Might as well try. You're not exactly in top form." As she grabbed the pancake mix and a spatula, Ben watched her, a faint smile tugging at his lips despite the pain. He wasn't used to this, someone stepping in, helping without being asked. It felt strange, but also good. Like maybe he didn't have to do everything alone, at least not today. The cabin had fallen into a peaceful stillness. Hope was long asleep, her soft snores barely audible from the small bedroom down the hall. Outside, the wind had stilled, leaving the snow-covered trees frozen under a moonlit sky. The only light inside came from the fire, its golden glow dancing across the room. Ben sat on the worn couch, staring into the flames, a mug of coffee cooling in his hands. Lily was next to him, her knees tucked under her borrowed sweater, her feet barely touching the floor. They hadn't spoken much since dinner, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was something else, something heavier, the kind of quiet that begged for words neither of them seemed willing to say. Lily shifted slightly, her shoulder brushing his. The contact was brief, but Ben noticed. He glanced at her, and she turned her head just enough to meet his eyes. Her expression was softer than he'd ever seen it, vulnerable. "You don't have to stay up," he said finally, his voice low. She gave a faint smile. "I don't mind, the fire's nice." "Not as warm as it used to be," he said, trying to keep it light. "This old place is always cold in the winter." "It's not so bad," she said softly, her gaze lingering on him. "It feels safe." Ben's throat tightened. Safe. The word hit him in a way he wasn't ready for. He looked back at the fire, swallowing hard. He didn't know why his pulse had quickened, why the air suddenly felt heavier. Maybe it was the way she was sitting so close, the way her voice had softened when she spoke. Maybe it was the quiet itself, so full of unspoken things. She leaned in just slightly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ben?" He turned his head, her face inches from his. He could see the faint flicker of the fire in her eyes, the way her breath hitched almost imperceptibly. He knew what was about to happen before she moved any closer. His heart hammered in his chest as she leaned in. Then he stopped her, pulling back just enough to break the moment. "I can't," he said, his voice rough. "Not like this." Lily froze, her expression unreadable. She nodded slowly, her smile fading. "Okay," she whispered, retreating to her side of the couch. The silence that followed was different, colder. He stared back into the fire, his chest tight, as the spark that had almost ignited faded into embers. The sound cut through the stillness of the empty street, sharp, jarring. A payphone, an actual payphone, ringing, its metallic echo slicing through the cold, quiet evening. Lily stopped in her tracks, the bag of groceries swinging limply at her side. She stared at the booth, half hidden beneath a crooked awning, like it was a relic from another time. The phone rang again. Her heart skipped. Then again. Her stomach twisted, a knot of unease pulling tighter with each chime. She stepped closer, each crunch of her boots in the snow feeling heavier than the last. The ringing grew louder, more insistent. She knew she shouldn't. She should keep walking. Head back to the cabin, put the groceries on the counter, pretend she never heard it. But her feet didn't listen. Before she knew it, she was standing in front of the booth, her breath fogging up the glass. The phone rang again, and her hand hovered over the receiver, a pause, a moment too long. Then she picked it up. "Hello?" For a second silence. Her own shallow breathing filled the line, followed by the faint crackle of static, and then a voice she hadn't heard in weeks. "Lily!" She froze. The bag slipped from her hand and hit the ground, forgotten. "Lily, it's me." Her assistant. Her right hand. The one person who had always known her real name, her real life. The one person she couldn't lie to. "What?" Her voice caught in her throat. "What is this? How did you—" "Lily, please, just listen. I've been trying to reach you for weeks. You're not safe out there." "I'm fine," she said, though her voice wavered. "I'm fine where I am." "No, you're not," the voice pressed, firm but pleading. "You can't keep running. Please come home, before it's too late." Her chest tightened. Home. The word felt foreign. The mansion, the money, the expectations, the weight of it all. Home was the last place she ever wanted to be again. "I can't," she whispered. "Not yet." The line crackled again, and then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the voice was gone. The dial tone hummed softly in her ear. She hung up, her hand trembling, and stared at the empty street. The wind bit at her face, and the groceries spilled out onto the snow. All she could do was stand there, paralyzed, as the world she'd been hiding from started to close in. The phone call wasn't meant for him. Ben wasn't even trying to listen. He'd only come into the kitchen to grab the hammer he'd left on the counter, one of the many tools that never seemed to make it back to the garage, where it belonged. But the tone of her voice stopped him in his tracks. Lily had her back to him, leaning over the phone on the wall like it was the only thing holding her up. She spoke in quick, hushed sentences. Her voice, usually soft and careful, was now edged with something sharper. Fear? Urgency? He couldn't tell. Ben paused by the doorway, the hammer still in his hand. He told himself he wasn't eavesdropping. It was his house, after all. But when she said, "I told you I can't come back yet. You don't understand what's at stake," something cold settled in his chest. Come back? To where? I just need more time. If anyone finds out where I am— She cut herself off, and her voice dropped lower. No, I told you, it's not safe yet. Ben gripped the hammer tighter, a dozen questions colliding in his mind. She had claimed not to remember anything. She had shown up with no ID, no phone, no clue who she was or why she'd ended up in the snow. But now, this? It didn't make sense. It didn't match. Just keep them off my back, Lily said, her voice sharp now. I'll deal with it when I'm ready. Ben's jaw tightened. Off her back? Deal with what? Before he could step away, she turned, her eyes meeting his. For a moment, neither of them moved. Her hand hovered by the receiver, her knuckles pale. Her lips parted like she wanted to say something, explain, maybe, but no words came. Ben swallowed hard. You've got people looking for you, Lily said nothing. Her silence spoke louder than anything else. The tension between them crackled, heavy and undeniable. Ben turned and walked out, his mind racing. Whatever she was running from, it was bigger than he'd realized. And now it was here. The cabin felt heavier tonight. The snow outside muffled everything, but the tension inside crackled like a storm waiting to hit. Ben had spent the better part of the evening pacing the living room, waiting for Hope to fall asleep before he said what was on his mind. Lily sat near the fire, legs tucked under her. She held a mug of tea she hadn't touched. When Ben finally stopped moving, standing just a few feet away from her, she glanced up. The look on his face was sharp, his eyes steady and unreadable. Why are you here? His voice was calm, but the edge was impossible to miss. Lily blinked, clearly thrown off. What do you mean? I heard you. On the phone. His arms crossed over his chest, and the distance between them felt like a canyon. You've got people looking for you. You told me you didn't remember anything, but that's not true, is it? Her hands tightened around the mug. Ben, I can— No, he interrupted, his voice rising slightly. No excuses. I need the truth, Lily. I let you into my home, around my daughter. I deserve to know who you are and what you're running from. Lily's throat worked, her lips parting and closing again, as if she couldn't decide what to say. She set the mug down on the hearth, her movements slow and deliberate. But when she looked back at him, there was no hiding the tears welling up in her eyes. I didn't want to be that person anymore, she said softly. What person? Ben pressed, his voice growing harder. Who are you really? Her breath hitched, and then the words poured out in a rush. I'm Lily Lancaster. Yes, that Lancaster. The house on the hill, the money, the name, all of it. But it's not what you think. It's not what anyone thinks. Her shoulders trembled as she spoke, and her voice cracked with every syllable. I didn't want to be her anymore, Ben. I didn't want that life, those expectations, all that pressure. I needed to get away, to remember what it felt like to breathe. Ben stared at her, his arms still crossed, his jaw tight. He wasn't sure if he felt anger or pity or something else entirely. He wanted to yell, to tell her how much she'd put them at risk, how wrong it was to keep the truth from him. But when he saw her sitting there, her walls crumbling before his eyes, something stopped him. I should have told you sooner, she whispered, her voice barely audible. If I said it out loud, it would mean going back. The silence that followed felt as thick as the snow outside. Ben didn't move. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, staring at her, while the firelight flickered against the tears on her face. The cabin was still, cloaked in the quiet that only a snow-blanketed night could bring. The fire had burned down to a soft, glowing ember, casting the living room in a warm, flickering light. Ben sat at the table, staring down at the piece of paper in his hands. Her handwriting was neat, careful, like each word had been chosen and rewritten in her mind a dozen times before the pen touched the page. He read the lines over again, though he already knew them by heart. Ben, I'm sorry for lying to you. Sorry for not being honest from the start. I know I don't deserve the trust you showed me, but I hope you can understand why I couldn't tell you the truth right away. I didn't come here to hurt anyone. I just needed a place to be myself, away from all the noise, the expectations, the life I never asked for. But now it's time for me to go. If I stay, I'll only bring more questions, more risks, and you and Hope don't deserve that. You've both given me more than I could ever repay. Kindness, warmth, and a reminder of the things that truly matter. Thank you, Ben. I won't forget this place, or you. I hope someday you can forgive me. Lily. The words blurred in front of his eyes as he folded the letter carefully, his hands trembling more than he'd like to admit. She was gone. He knew it as soon as he'd stepped into the living room and saw the empty couch, the blanket neatly folded and left on the armrest. He had looked around the cabin, calling her name once, twice, then stopped himself. She wasn't here. She wasn't going to answer. The front door had been unlocked, her boots and coat missing from where they'd been by the door. No sign of her, just the letter. Ben clenched his jaws and set the letter on the table. He wanted to be angry, wanted to feel betrayed, but all he felt was that same dull ache that had sat in his chest since Megan's death. The feeling of something slipping away before he could hold on to it. He sat there for a long time, staring at the empty couch, the folded blanket, the letter. The snow fell heavier outside, and the cabin seemed quieter than it ever had before. Ben found Hope curled in the corner of her room, her stuffed bunny clutched tight against her chest. Her little shoulders shook as she sobbed quietly, her face buried in the folds of her blanket. He crouched down, heart aching, unsure of what to say. Hope had been crying since the moment she realized Lily wasn't in the house anymore, since she'd looked out the frosted window and seen nothing but snow and dark woods. "Where did she go, Daddy?" Hope asked. Her voice muffled and thick with tears, she peeked up at him, her cheeks streaked, her eyes red. "She said she wouldn't leave us." Ben's chest tightened. He couldn't bring himself to say the words she wanted to hear. He couldn't promise Lily would come back, couldn't tell Hope it was all a mistake. Instead, he pulled her into his arms, letting her cry against his shoulder. "I don't know, sweetheart," he said softly. "I don't know." When Hope finally fell asleep, exhausted from tears, Ben stood and slipped out of the house. He shoved his hands deep into his coat pockets, the night air biting at his face. The snow crunched underfoot as he walked through town, his boots leaving heavy tracks behind. The stillness of the streets felt wrong. Every shadow looked like a figure. Every distant sound made his pulse quicken. At the diner, the lights were dim, the chairs already turned upside down on the tables. But Ben noticed movement through the window. He pushed the door open, the bell jingling as he stepped inside. Donna, the owner, looked up from wiping down the counter. She froze, her eyes flicking over him. He didn't have to ask. He saw it in her face. She'd heard the whispers, the questions, the stranger in his cabin, the disappearance. "She left," Donna said quietly, before Ben could even speak. "Didn't say a word to anyone, just gone." Ben clenched his jaw, trying to hide the frustration, the worry. Did anyone see her?" Donna hesitated. "Tom said he saw her at the bus stop, but that was hours ago. No one knows where she was headed." Ben nodded, a tight, silent gesture, and left without another word. As he stepped back into the cold, he glanced toward the hill in the distance. The mansion loomed there, dark and foreboding against the snow-covered trees. The thought of her heading back there twisted something deep inside him. The whispers were growing louder, and so was the weight pressing on his chest. The tires of Ben's truck crunched over the packed snow as he turned off the main road. The mansion loomed in the distance, its stone walls bathed in the cold light of the setting sun. Even from here, the place felt imposing, an enormous shadow stretching over the frozen landscape. Ben's knuckles tightened on the wheel. His breath fogged the windshield as the truck climbed the hill, the mansion growing larger with every passing second. He hadn't been sure she'd come here, but deep down it made sense. If Lily wasn't at the cabin, if she'd left without a word, there was only one place she could have gone. When he reached the long driveway, he slowed to a crawl. The iron gates stood open, their intricate latticework outlined by a dusting of snow. His stomach knotted as he rolled through. No guards, no one to stop him. Just the quiet hum of engines idling somewhere near the grand entrance. He brought the truck to a halt and climbed out, the cold air biting at his face. His boots sank into the snow as he stepped forward, each movement slow and deliberate. The sound of voices carried on the wind, low, murmured, clipped. A limousine sat just beyond the gates, its sleek black surface gleaming in the weak light. The driver stood by the rear door, his face unreadable, his stance formal. Then the door opened. Lily emerged. She wore a dark, fitted coat, her hair swept back neatly, her posture straighter than Ben had ever seen it. She stepped out like someone accustomed to being waited on, her head held high, her every move measured. For a moment Ben didn't recognize her. The woman standing there was nothing like the one who had laughed nervously over pancakes or helped him split wood. She was composed, controlled, like she'd slipped back into a role she'd never fully left behind. Lily turned and spoke to someone inside the car, someone Ben couldn't see, and then the door closed. She glanced up toward the house, hesitating for a fraction of a second before starting toward the wide stone steps. Ben's voice cut through the air before he could stop himself. "Lily." She froze mid-step. Slowly she turned to face him. Her eyes widened slightly, the mask slipping just long enough for him to see the panic behind it. "What are you doing here?" she said, her voice steadier than he expected. Ben's jaw tightened. He took a few more steps, closing the gap between them. "That's funny. I was about to ask you the same thing." The wrought iron gates stood wide open, the Lancaster estate beyond them stark and foreboding in the pale light of a cloudy afternoon. Lily lingered at the threshold, her hands buried deep in her coat pockets, shoulders hunched against the biting wind. The grandeur of the mansion didn't intimidate her anymore. It was hers, after all, always had been. But that didn't make it feel any less cold. She took a step forward, the crunch of her boots on the snow sharp against the silence. In the distance, the sprawling estate loomed, a symbol of everything she'd tried to escape. The long, sweeping driveway, the towering stone facade, the tall windows that never seemed to let in enough light. The sight of it all made her chest tighten, a knot forming under her ribs that she couldn't shake. For weeks she'd been running from this place, from what it meant, from who it had turned her into. And now, standing at the gate, she felt the full weight of what she'd left behind, the promises, the responsibilities, the people whose lives were intertwined with hers, whether she wanted them to be or not. Her breath escaped in short, visible bursts as she stared at the house. She hadn't crossed the threshold yet, hadn't committed herself to stepping back into that world. But standing here, she realized that maybe she never really left it. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, sharp, cutting, impossible to forget. He'd always told her she was destined to live within these walls, to carry the Lancaster name as if it were a badge of honor. But Lily had never seen it that way. It was a weight, a shackle. And now, no matter how far she'd run, it seemed she was always drawn back here. She glanced down at the snow, her eyes stinging. She wasn't sure if it was the wind or the flood of emotions that made them burn. When she finally lifted her head, The mansion loomed larger than before. Lily squared her shoulders, drawing in a shaky breath. She wasn't hiding anymore. That much was true. But as she stepped through the gates, the ache in her chest told her this wasn't a victory. It felt more like surrender. The storm outside was a distant whisper compared to the tension in the room. Ben stood in the doorway of the sitting room, his hands shoved into his jacket pockets, his stance rigid and unyielding. The low fire crackling in the hearth did little to warm the cold in his chest. Lily was on the opposite side of the room, her arms crossed, the space between them feeling as vast as a canyon. Ben finally spoke, his voice low and rough. "So everything you told me, it was all just a story? Just lies to make me feel sorry for you?" Lily flinched, but her voice remained steady. "I didn't lie about everything, not about the things that mattered." "Not the things that mattered?" Ben's voice rose, disbelief etched in every word. He took a step closer, shaking his head. "You didn't even tell me your real name, Lily, or whatever it is. How am I supposed to believe anything you've said?" "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said quickly. Her voice cracked, but she didn't look away. I was scared." "Scared?" Ben let out a bitter laugh. "You think you're the only one who's scared? You think I haven't been terrified every damn day since my wife died? Since I lost my job? Since I didn't know how I was going to keep my daughter safe and warm? But you don't see me running away, or—" "I wasn't running from you," she snapped, her eyes flashing. "I was running from what that life was turning me into. From who they wanted me to be. I wasn't lying, Ben. Not about the way it felt to be in that cabin with you and Hope. That was real." He shook his head again, his hands still buried deep in his pockets, his jaw tight. "I don't know if I can believe that. I don't know if I can believe anything you say." Her shoulders slumped, the firelight catching the sheen in her eyes. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "It was real to me." Ben didn't answer. He just turned and walked out, the words echoing in his mind, as he left her standing alone in the flickering light. The first thing Ben noticed was the smoke. It billowed into the sky, dark and heavy, curling up from the far wing of the mansion. He'd barely reached the gate when he saw people running, staff in uniform hurrying across the grounds, their voices raised in panic. The faint wail of a distant fire alarm carried on the cold wind. "Move!" someone shouted. "Get the water hoses!" Ben leapt out of his truck, his boots crunching on the frozen gravel. He scanned the scene, heart pounding. The fire had taken hold fast, flames licking through the tall leaded windows. The heat shimmered even from where he stood. He turned toward the nearest group of staff, some of them clutching handheld extinguishers, others looking utterly frozen in place. "Everyone out?" he asked urgently. "Anyone still inside?" A young man shook his head. "I don't know. Mrs. Lancaster, Miss Lily, she went back in, said she had to get something, I think." His voice cracked. "I think she's still in there." Ben's stomach twisted. Without another thought, he ran toward the house. Smoke stung his eyes as he neared the main doors, the acrid smell clawing at his throat. He pulled his coat collar over his nose and pushed through the heavy front door, instantly hit by a wall of heat and chaos. Flames crawled up the wooden paneling, the once opulent interior now a scene from a nightmare. "Lily!" he called, his voice muffled by the roaring fire. "Lily, where are you?" "Back here!" her voice rang out, faint but clear. He followed the sound, weaving through the dense smoke and scattered furniture. In the kitchen, she was on her knees, struggling to coax a terrified golden retriever from beneath a heavy table. The dog's fur was singed in places, and its eyes were wide with fear. "Ben!" she gasped as he appeared, coughing into her sleeve. "He won't come out. I can't—" He didn't hesitate. Dropping down beside her, he reached under the table, his voice low and calm. "Come on, boy. Come on. You're okay." The dog hesitated for a moment before scrambling toward Ben, yelping, as a piece of debris fell nearby. Ben grabbed the dog's collar and hauled it close, standing just as another burst of heat rolled through the room. "Let's go," he said, his hand gripping Lily's arm. "Now." Together they pushed back toward the main door, the smoke so thick it was impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. The golden retriever barked wildly, its panic matching their own as they stumbled out into the freezing air. Outside, the staff rushed forward, taking the dog, throwing blankets over their shoulders, pulling Lily into a quick, relieved embrace. Ben stepped back, his heart hammering in his chest, sweat dripping despite the cold. He looked back at the mansion, now fully engulfed, the fire roaring high into the night sky. Lily turned to him, her face streaked with soot and tears. "Ben!" He shook his head. "Later." He didn't want thanks, didn't need it. But as they stood there, watching the flames consume the house, he knew something had shifted. The smell of smoke still clung to the air, sharp and bitter, even after the flames had been extinguished. Snow blanketed the scorched remains of the mansion's west wing, giving the ruins a strange, haunting beauty. Ben stood a few yards from the charred frame, hands stuffed deep in his jacket pockets, watching as the last of the emergency crews packed up their gear. Lily was beside him, her face pale and drawn, eyes fixed on what was left of the estate. The golden retriever sat at her feet, its head resting on her knee. She absently ran her fingers through its fur, but her expression didn't change. "It's gone," she said quietly. Ben shifted his weight. "Not all of it. You've still got—" He gestured vaguely toward the rest of the house, the parts that hadn't been consumed. But even as he said it, he knew the words felt empty, hollow. She shook her head. "No, Ben. It's all gone. This place, it hasn't felt like mine in a long time." He looked at her, surprised. "You grew up here, didn't you? It's your family's house." "It's not a home," she said. Her voice was steady, but there was a rawness to it that cut through the cold. "Not anymore. Maybe it never was. Just a symbol of everything I was supposed to be, everything I didn't want to become. A prison with velvet curtains." Her words hung in the air, heavy and unrelenting. Ben glanced back at the ruins, at the elegant structure now reduced to rubble. He could still see what it must have been once, grand, untouchable. But he'd never imagined that beneath all the wealth and power, it had been empty for her, lonely. "So what now?" he asked. The question felt bigger than the moment, bigger than the house. Lily let out a slow breath, her hand stilling on the dog's head. "I don't know. Maybe I figure out what home really means. Maybe I start over." Ben studied her for a long moment. Her face still smudged with soot, her voice quiet but certain. He'd always thought she had something to lose, something to fight for. Now he realized she was looking for that just as much as he was. And for the first time, he wondered if maybe she'd found it here, among the ashes. It started with the school. The roof, battered by years of storms, had leaked for so long that some classrooms had become uninhabitable. Every time it rained, teachers scrambled to keep books dry, shifting desks away from the steady drip of water. Parents had been fundraising for years, but they never raised enough to make real progress. Then, one morning, almost without warning, construction crews showed up. "Who hired them?" the principal had asked, bewildered, as trucks rolled in and workers started hauling materials to the schoolyard. No one knew at first, but by the end of the day, word had spread. It was Lily. Next came the diner. It had been the social hub of the town for decades, a place where locals gathered for coffee, gossip, and familiar faces. Over time, though, the old booths had split at the seams, the counter stools wobbled, and the kitchen equipment groaned under the weight of years. That, too, changed seemingly overnight. The floor was retiled, the counter replaced, and a new grill installed. Regulars came in the next morning to find the same warm atmosphere, just shinier, sturdier, and humming with life. But it was the garage that hit Ben the hardest. He'd always thought he'd be a mechanic until the day he couldn't hold a wrench. The place he worked out of was never truly his. It belonged to an old friend who let him use the space in exchange for free labor on his truck. Ben never complained. He was just grateful for a roof over his tools. Then, one afternoon, Lily handed him a set of keys. "What's this?" he'd asked, staring at them in his palm. "It's yours," she said simply. "A real shop, fully outfitted. I know how much it means to you." He looked at her, unsure if he could accept something so big, so life-changing. But she just smiled, that quiet, knowing smile she wore when she didn't need to explain herself. Over the next few weeks, the town changed. The schoolyard echoed with children's laughter once again. The diner filled with people marveling at how bright it looked. And the garage, Ben's garage, hummed with the sound of hard work and new beginnings. Lily didn't make speeches or ask for gratitude. She just did the work quietly, steadily, until the town started to feel like a place people could be proud of again. The moon hung low over the cabin, casting long silver shadows through the trees. Ben's boots crunched over the gravel path as he made his way up the hill, his shoulders aching from a long day at the shop. The cold had settled deep into his bones, and the only thing he could think about was warming up by the fire and getting a few hours of sleep before starting it all over again tomorrow. When the cabin came into view, he froze, mid-step. The porch light was on, its faint glow spilling out onto the snow-covered steps. And there, sitting on the top step, was Lily. She was wrapped in a thick coat, her head bent over something in her lap. As Ben stepped closer, he saw what it was: Hope's drawing. A piece of paper, crinkled and slightly torn, covered in colorful crayon lines, a house, a tree, and 3 stick figures. One had a little heart drawn on its chest. In Hope's careful, uneven handwriting it read, "My family." Ben stopped a few feet away, his chest tightening. "What are you doing here?" Lily looked up slowly. Her face was pale, her eyes rimmed with red as if she'd been crying. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out at first. Instead, she held the drawing out to him. I found it inside," she said finally, her voice soft, almost fragile. "Hope left it by the fireplace." Ben's throat tightened. "So you let yourself in? I didn't know where else to go." She glanced down at the paper again, her fingers smoothing the edges. "I kept thinking about this. About her. About you." The anger he thought he'd feel wasn't there, only the ache that had been sitting heavy in his chest since she'd left. He took another step forward, his hands still in his pockets. "Lily, you can't just come back like nothing happened." "I know," she said quickly. Her voice broke, and she looked up at him, tears streaking her cheeks. "I know I hurt you. I know I left, and I didn't explain. But I couldn't stop thinking about all of this, about how it felt to be here with you and Hope, about how, for the first time, I felt like I wasn't just running." Ben stared at her, the porch light casting a soft halo around her silhouette. The cabin stood silent behind them, the snow falling gently, muting the world beyond their small circle of light. "I don't want to run anymore," she whispered. The sky above was a deep, endless stretch of stars, the kind of night that made the world feel both infinite and achingly small. The fire outside the cabin had burned down to glowing embers, casting a faint orange hue across the snow-covered ground. Ben stood a few feet away, hands buried deep in his jacket pockets, his breath rising in soft clouds as he stared at Lily. She was looking up at the stars, her arms crossed against the cold, her face lit by the faintest hint of moonlight. There was something about the way she stood, still, quiet, grounded, that pulled at him. No more running, no more secrets, just her. "It's beautiful out here," she said softly, not turning to face him. "Peaceful." Ben nodded. "It is." A long silence stretched between them. It wasn't uncomfortable, it was full. Full of everything unspoken, everything that had built up since the night she'd stepped into his life and turned it upside down. "I never knew what that word meant," Lily said after a moment. "Home. I've had houses, estates, places to live, but none of them ever felt like this." She finally looked at him, her eyes steady, a faint tremor in her voice. "You gave me that. You and Hope. Ben didn't reply right away. He watched her, taking in every detail, the way her breath hitched, the way her eyes softened. He felt the weights of all they'd been through, the loss, the fear, the anger, and beneath it all, the undeniable truth that she had come back, not because she was supposed to, not because she needed to, but because she wanted to. He stepped closer, the snow crunching under his boots. Lily turned fully toward him, her arms falling to her sides, her gaze never leaving his. "I didn't think I'd ever trust anyone again," he said, his voice low, steady. "Not after everything, not after Megan." Lily swallowed hard, her eyes glistening. "I'm not asking for anything, Ben. I'm here, if you'll have me." Something shifted inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. Without thinking, he reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Her eyes widened just slightly, her breath catching, as he leaned in. And then, under the endless stretch of stars, he kissed her. Not because of who she was or what she'd been running from, but because of where she was now, because she stayed. When he pulled back, she smiled, a soft, real smile, a smile that said, "I'm home." And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Ben felt like he was home too.